So Rugby Championship 2018 is just around the corner. It's a good time to have a look at the four captains from the four teams. So you got Kieran Read, Agustín Creevy, Michael Hooper and Kolisi, these four captains. I'm kind of looking at a couple of questions. Are they the best player for their position, for their team? And just kind of how is their leadership? How does it work with other players? And how does it kind of influence refs in some cases? So we'll start with Kieran Read. Is he the best number 8 in New Zealand rugby right now? I mean, there's going to be arguments made for a lot of different players. Luke Whitelock, like I said in my Highlanders stats review, I think, his tackling machine, his offload machine, sets guys up, creates a lot of space. Someone said in the comments that he's one of the best, like top 5 back rowers in the world, which is a big compliment. Akira Ioane, who couldn't even make the All Black squad, is just a tackle busting machine. But then you got Kieran Read. He only played 5 games of Super Rugby this year, but it was a solid 5 games. He defensively, I mean, if you're just looking at the average stats throughout the season, had really good numbers for his defense. And we all know with the ball that he is able to create that magic as well. We probably didn't have enough time to see it this season, given how limited his exposure was with only, like I said, 5 games. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of one where you got to go with a bit of a reputation pick. He's your All Blacks captain. He's been there and done it before. He's kind of thrown himself at the deep end going into the end of the Super Rugby season kind of cold and managed to kind of fit in without being like jarringly off the pace. So I think we have to give it to him. He's probably the best number 8 in New Zealand rugby. But like I said, a lot of other contenders for that title. There's a bit of a question about how well he will go in terms of minutes, because I think his average totals for Super Rugby this season on those 5 games was about 60. I mean, ideally you'd like your captain to play the full 80 so he can kind of keep that conversation going with the ref and keep the consistency with the team. But I know in the Super Rugby final he played 80 minutes, so he's probably going to go 80. I guess if there's a result where they're thinking they're comfortably in front, perhaps they would pull him off. But I would still look for him to play 80 despite only playing 5 games and being 32, so getting on. He obviously had pretty big shoes to fill after taking over from Richie McCaw. From what I've read about his captaincy style, he does take a bit more control than what Richie did in terms of taking on stuff with the players. Supposedly from about Thursday onwards, it's Kieran and the leadership group, all the senior players who kind of run things. They take things out of the coach's hands. It's kind of like the message has been received, now it's on us to take care of it. So he is taking on more responsibilities with that leadership team. So I think it's fair to say he's probably got them running like a pretty cohesive unit. As to how he handles the ref, well, I don't know if you guys have seen this the channel Squidge Rugby. I'll put a link to that. There's a particular video from that Lions series where there was that contentious call towards the end of the game. The video is about Sam Warburton and how he was, his prowess as a player, and part of that was his tactics talking to the ref, and it kind of highlights Warburton's tactics against Kieran Read's and perhaps doesn't paint Kieran in the best light. So yeah, perhaps if there is one element of his game that needs working on that was highlighted in that video was his just like management of the ref. Perhaps could use a bit of work. But if you're in a team like the Crusaders or the All Blacks, for the most part, it's a winning team. So it's probably not one that he's had to manage as much as he might have needed to. But yeah, so Kieran, I think, if you're an All Blacks fan, is all around a pretty good choice. Agustín Creevy for the Pumas. Is he the best player in his position? I think without a doubt, yes. He is one of the best hookers in world rugby. I mean, if you look at his stats throughout Super Rugby, he was the second overall hooker for turnovers, and that's behind Malcolm Marx. I'm including kind of pilfers and ruck and maul forced penalties. He's the number 1 hooker for runs and second for run meters, number 1 for passing. The guy gets the ball a lot. There has been criticisms of him before for trying to do too much with the Pumas. Perhaps he should kind of take his hands off and let some other guys kind of get in there, playing too many minutes. In terms of his minutes, he's playing only an average of 54, which for a front rower is more than some, but it is less than others. So How long he stays on will be interesting. You've got to think he's going to get subbed at some point. Montoya is there, who's a capable replacement, and probably in terms of experience could use some game time as well. It was a little bit of contentious kind of goings on with the Jaguares at the start of the season when Ledesma took over as coach, removed Creevy as captain of the Jaguares, kind of linking into that thing what I said about him trying to do too much, maybe he's taking a step back. I had read kind of rumors and kind of just through the grapevine stuff that there were kind of like guys in that squad who held a bit of power, and Ledesma was kind of stamping his authority on the team by removing Creevy as captain. I obviously have no idea how much of that is actually true, but it is interesting that now that Ledesma is in charge of the Pumas, he's put Creevy back in charge of the team as captain. So I guess they're on the same page now if they were not earlier. The guy's 33, so like I said, his minutes, he's probably not going to be going 80. There is a concern, I guess, with him that his penalties conceded are pretty high. He was the #1 hooker for penalties conceded, but that does go hand in hand with him trying to get his hands on the ball on the ground. But yeah, there is that possibility that gets on the wrong side of the ref. He is quite chatty. Questions the ref a fair bit at scrum time. I'm not sure how much he plays up sometimes. Like, his English is better than he lets on, I think. But yeah. So, I mean, he's an inspirational guy in Argentinian rugby, so I can't think of... there are other guys who could potentially be captain, but he is definitely a fitting captain for sure. The next guy, Michael Hooper from the Wallabies. Obviously, he's one of the more dynamic number 7s in world rugby. He's got some pace that a lot of loose forwards would look on with a bit of envy. Is he the best player in his position is a big question when you got David Pocock in that team. The fact that David Pocock gets moved to usually number 8 to suit Michael Hooper is a bone of contention with some people. But yeah, I mean, they're equally both very good players, although slightly different in what they do. Similar, like they're not kind of chalk and cheese. They're both good at the breakdown. They both have very good numbers in terms of pilfers. But like I said, Michael Hooper's more of your dynamic guy and uses his pace, where I feel like Pocock's probably got a bit more nous. I mean, those knees of his aren't putting pace on anybody. But he is pretty young. He's only 26. He's been in charge of the Wallabies, or at least as captain, for not as long as as Creevy and Read in their jobs. And with his 5-year contract extension, that's pretty much the green light for him, barring some kind of, I mentioned it in the comments as well, barring some kind of scandal or outrage. He's pretty much kind of set in stone to be Wallabies captain for those next 5 years, I would imagine. Whoever takes over after Checker, I can't see them shifting that up. But so yeah, in theory, that could help him. I mean, if you're a Wallabies guy, you're probably going to want to be on Hoops' good side just because he is going to be the captain for such a long time. Saying that, he does have a pretty strong leadership group. I have read that he's very kind of open to taking feedback from people. And when you've got the likes of, Guinea, Pocock, very experienced hands, and Pocock's not quiet in putting his kind of views forth on some things. Coleman is captain of the Rebels, and he's very vocal. Although, interestingly, when you watch Rebels games and they focus right in on their huddles, it seems to be Guinea doing more of the talking than Coleman, to be fair. So, there's definitely other leaders to take a bit of that pressure off Michael Hooper, even if Hoops is the one who has to kind of go and front all the press conferences. He plays about 79 minutes a game in Super Rugby, so I don't think there's any issues with him kind of coming off early. I've been a bit critical of him in the past for his captaincy, because there have been times when I've seen him in games, the refs warned him for something and they said, go talk to your players, and I've just seen him kind of trot off with his hands on his hips and not really said a word. We all imagine that you get the captain and he's getting the guys in the huddle and he's giving them a real talking to, but there's not kind of one stock standard form of captaincy to fit them all, so I guess he's got his own mould. He does seem to be kind of easing his way into that and kind of getting a bit more authority about the way he does things, even if it's not, like I said, just yelling at guys. Perhaps more like, and I'll compare it to Kieran Read, when Kieran Read was kind of speaking directly at the ref. He does seem to be a bit more softly spoken when he's handling the ref. I'm not sure how much influence he's exerting, but he definitely seems to kind of take the ref's comments on board. How he dishes it out to his players, I'm not sure, but I guess that kind of gets him on a good side of the ref kind of if nothing else. Although in saying that, there was an article out, I think yesterday or the day before, saying highly critical of him as captain, saying he's the worst Wallabies captain in a long time, and he's the most like yellow carded Wallabies or international rugby captain of this kind of era. So yeah, I guess he does kind of have that to watch. If he is going to be captain, he needs to be staying on the field as much as he can. But yeah, I mean, he's had to kind of fill that void with Stephen Moore retiring. So yeah, we'll see. He's still got improvements to make, but like I said, the guy's 26, around for 5 more years, so he will only continue to get better, I would imagine. The last one's Kolisi, 27 years old in terms of his captaincy, very early days in the Springboks colours. Is he the best player in his position? Well, what's his position is kind of the question. All the signs out that he's going to be playing blindside, which is probably the role he's best suited to. He's not a guy that fits into any one box. He's not an out-and-out fetcher for sure. He can fetch, but it's not really what he's made to do. He's not quite like Jerome Kaino in his build as a number 6. But he's a bit of a jack of all trades, and I think focusing on one role is probably going to be helpful for him. But in terms of his captaincy, it's still pretty early days. He is always going to have a bit more spotlight put on him just because he's the first black captain of the Springboks, and also because of the other captains you've got in the squad. So you've still got Eben Etzebeth and Warren Whiteley in that squad, who are also Springbok captains. So I guess that's kind of good for him as a new captain, that you've got other leaders in the group to kind of help out. I'm not sure how they kind of divvy up those roles as to whether they've got like a kind of official leadership group or if it's just kind of as it comes. But yeah, how he manages that is definitely something to kind of watch. You got to give the guy credit for that England series where he was making his debut as captain, and he was openly pretty nervous about being that, but he did say it was kind of good to have a guy like Dwayne Vermeulen there, who's another very experienced hand. So modest guy, he deflected some of the praise that was coming to him, because I mean in that England series they were down twice. They managed to come back, and it wasn't just like half time. They came out and had a good second half. They were having a good second half to the first half. So it wasn't the coach that was getting in there and kind of telling guys to buck their ideas up. It was obviously something the players were doing, and you have to give the captain a lot of credit for that. So I'm assuming that he's got some pretty good messages that he puts out to his players to kind of get them to come together in those hard times. He's only had 3 games, or was it 4? Was he captain in the game in America? I can't remember. Someone can remind me. But yeah, very early on in his Springboks captaincy. But in terms of that leadership, you'd have to say kind of so far so good. 69 minutes was his average this season, so perhaps another guy who has questions as to whether he's going to play the full 80. And I think by his own pretty high standards, his season wasn't the best. He's not been the form kind of the guy in his position, whichever one he's been playing. But yeah, I guess there's more to it than just that pure form. And the Stormers themselves had a pretty off year, so it's kind of it's whether it's a team thing or whether an individual thing. I feel like once he puts on that green jersey, he's gonna lift his performances from what we've seen in Super Rugby this year. But again, time will tell. So yeah, his management of the referee is not one. I can't think of any instances off the top of my head where he's kind of gotten offside with a referee. He seems to be more like that kind of he'll take that whatever advice or instructions or whatever it is from the referee to take on to his players. I feel like he's not going to get argumentative and probably hopefully disseminate that message to the players in a kind of quick, concise and clear way. But yeah, these are the captains. You guys let me know what you think. If any of them you think are perhaps lucky to be there in terms of their position. If any of them, their leadership you think is particularly good or particularly lacking, you guys let me know your thoughts. And yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. Looking forward to Rugby Championship on the weekend. Alright guys, see you later.